What up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about why USPSA and competition shooting may or may not be the best route for self-defense, home defense, preparedness, or even duty purposes. I'm going to be covering my thoughts on the mindset, the body mechanics, and cover, because I think those are the biggest topics to cover when we're talking about the differences between efficient, effective training for the things that I listed, the things I'm into, versus pure competition and just going fast and having a good time and hobby shooting, basically. Okay, so I want to talk about mindset for a second here. The biggest difference I found in mindset when I'm going into a training session, whether that is with my friends that do USPSA, whether that's at a match, or my friends that just do this because they value self-defense, they value preparedness, and to a certain extent, it could be a hobby to value like preparedness, like bug out bags, rucking, kit, things like that. To a certain extent, all this is a hobby. You have to enjoy it to do it super often, unless you're just extremely disciplined, which in most cases isn't the case here. So in terms of mindset, the biggest things I want to cover is attack mode versus defense mode. Why I think that matters is because how you approach a situation is much different, in my opinion, when you're in attack mode versus defense mode. What do I mean by that? If I'm always pedal to the metal, just gassing, and just always just attacking, knowing that nothing's ever shooting back, when something does, actually you do get shot back at, or you do get attacked, you physically get attacked, whether it's just with body parts or with tools like firearms or knives. The point is that if all you ever think about is attack, and never defense, then you start training that chin up mentality, right? You see fighters, whether it's boxing or MMA, that are just like chin up, hands down, and they're all about the attack, because you're a little bit more free flowing when you're relaxed and the hands are down. You can punch from the hip, right? Instead of up here, which might be a little bit slower, but more defensive, more tactile, maybe a more strategic approach, you know? So the reason why this matters is because if any of that stuff actually happens to where you should, either on duty or defending yourself out and about or in your house, if that situation should ever arise, are you going to be John Wick and you're just going to be fucking blasting through hallways, just pa 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 pa? Or are you going to be in the more defensive space? Are you going to be really thinking through everything before you do it? Is there going to be build drills happening every time you see people? Is it going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Or is it going to be more like be held accountable for this because maybe there's laws and people are going to have a really hard time, harder than they expect, dealing with defending themselves, just getting through, the court system. Even if you did nothing wrong, there's a process to all this, right? So being held accountable, whether you're law enforcement, military, or civilian, for your shots is huge. If you just burn a paper target down in attack mode, and you miss some, oh well, Charlie, Mike, oh well, it's okay. You miss some, but there's no consequences here. Because going fast to push your limit, to outrun your headlights, is just part of your training, it's part of your hobby, it's part of your fun. It's not really something you can say or compare to a real situation, because if you just build drill an area and a defensive situation, you could hit something or somebody that you did not mean to hit or intend to hit. That's kind of important in the real world. So the attack mode mentality is not really something that I would encourage people to adopt on a regular basis, which is what I see every single time I go to a USPSA match. And I don't even have to go to that many matches, I've only been to 6, to understand that that's what you're training as you go out there. Attack. With a more defensive mindset, being held accountable, being a little bit different with your throttle control, with your shooting, but also just straight up how your body position is and cover. How you utilize cover is different when you are in attack mode versus defend mode, right? When you know that there's a lot on the line versus a competition on the line, right? So I'm gonna cover. I'm gonna talk about a little bit about cover right now to kind of blend in the attack mode, defensive mode ideas that I'm trying to explain here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about mindset and cover and transitioning from mindset to cover and how that actually equates in what I would think are real situations, right? So I'm going to use this music stand as cover. Use your imagination because this is kind of all I have with this cover. The difference between attack mode and defend mode would be how I approach a threat on the other side of this cover with me being behind this cover, right? There's no denying that if you are getting shot at or not getting shot at, but you know that there's a threat around this cover right here, you're going to approach this cover differently, right? So what you see often in USPSA shooting is somebody starts back here and then behind cover, and then timer goes off, they run up to cover, and they're like, bang, 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 bang. Now what's happening here? Did I utilize cover, or is that just an obstacle that was in my way of shooting faster and competing better? That's an obstacle to somebody who trains USPSA. It's not cover, okay? So let's talk about cover in a defensive space, right? Somebody's around this bend, and I am here, and I'm gonna go ahead and peek out this way, and I might inch further, and I might lean out. Point is, how much cover am I utilizing here, and how am I approaching this cover versus the USPSA, the competition way, which, again, I'm going to keep resorting back to this mindset throughout this video. Go fast, compete. I'm hyper competitive. Don't put me in a competition and tell me to go slow and you know you're not going to win. It's not good for my mental psyche, and also there's better ways to do things instead of going to competitions knowing you're going to lose and training to lose, right? So again, defensive situation, right? And then USPSA situation. Timer goes off, and then because you want to get the best visual, you want to get around this obstacle, and you want to clear it completely, even if there's boxes on the ground or whatever, like they lay out the pipes or the boxes, you want to get past this obstacle rather than use this cover. Okay? So cover versus obstacle. To me, that's another thing in the mindset. That's another thing that's going to create a training scar. That's another thing that's going to create or take a step in the direction away from self-defense, away from preparedness, away from tactics if you're on duty. So that's one of many things that I'm going to cover here. Okay, so let's cover movement a little bit. Movement patterns. I come from a CrossFit background. Mostly fitness is my background in training, and all the self-defense stuff didn't come until a few years ago. So my point is, with my movement background, I want to break down exactly what it looks like to go into a competition setting versus how you would actually respond in a self-defense setting, a physical confrontation, utilizing cover, or actually running, right? So first thing I want to talk about here is stance and posture. The differences in stance and posture. So you're going to find often in the USPSA position, which I'll demonstrate right now, the best of the best generally are feet to the side, maybe a little bit off, right? And then they're going to be heavily bent knees, right? And then they are going to be good up here with their hands, but they might be tucking that chin down a little bit, or even if it's chin up and they have like a really nice SRO or a really good optic with a riser, whatever, if it's a race gun or if it's just a gun that's set up with a good optic, even if they're chin up, their knees are still in a squatty position, even if there's a slight difference in their stance, even if it's a little offset and it's not necessarily squared up, even though squared up is generally how USPSA shooters shoot. But even if you have chin up, generally when you're in attack mode and you get that tunnel vision and you don't have spatial awareness, this is where you end up, because there's a lot of movement in USPSA, but the movement is not so much going through hallways or open sprinting. The movement is very much like a Y shape or a T shape, something of that nature. It's very much like side to side lateral or just like a quick diagonal movement to a box, right? So what they tend to do with their stance is go here after their movement, have springy legs because there is like short little choppy movements, right? But like I said, the tunnel vision is a thing, okay? Tunnel vision. Even if some of the best kind of get more upright, essentially you still have tunnel vision when you're in attack mode, okay? Let's talk about posture for what the CQB specialists say is the right posture. Stay upright, stay aware of your surroundings, right? This is a airsoft rifle, but I know I joke about this all the time, but it's true. Good posture and a CQB setting most of the time, or just stationary firearms training to have spatial awareness, right, for self-defense training or duty is going to be nice and upright, right? And my feet are going to be staggered in a square position. They're going to be front corner of the room and then back corner of the room. It's going to be feet about shoulder width, maybe a little bit wider, but they're for sure a foot or two in front of each other. Maybe it's just a little bit, or maybe it's a little bit more athletic. Either way, it's here, and then my upper body is going to be upright with that chin up. That's why there's a lot of optics risers, and it's not going to be so much in like that, right? It's going to be upright. That's what the general consensus is with all the people who have kicked down doors, and the most recent CQB posture and way to clear a room, right? I think that's general consensus that that's where we want to be. We want to be upright, spatial awareness, and we don't want to be sucked in like that, which this is generally what you see when you're at a 2-gun competition, a 3-gun competition, PCC, carbines. I'll do it with a pistol. This is a SIRT gun. It's a laser. Okay, so again, same stance. I have a strong base, right? I have one foot in front of the other. It's about shoulder width apart. And then my upper body is going to be nice and upright. And most of the time I have an optic, so that helps with spatial awareness. Or even if I'm with irons, maybe there's a little bit of focus, a little bit of a dip, maybe, versus competition, which it might start off drawing here like this, because that's a USPSA thing to do. It might start there and it always ends up here, or it always ends up here every time. People who do competition all the time end up developing these body mechanics, these habits, right? And we're just talking, for the most part right now, posture and stance, okay? Now let's go over what movement looks like with USPSA competition, that whole space, versus self-defense or somebody on duty, right? So first thing we're going to talk about is the USPSA stance. Competition stance when you're moving. If you want to take a look at my feet for a second, we know the upper body now. Generally, if you start here with the lower body, as soon as you draw and you shoot and it's time to actually move from one place to another, one box to another when you're shooting USPSA, generally my feet are going to turn into bent knees and tight roping legs, right? So from the side, it's going to go bang, and then you're going to have good footwork for competition, but bad footwork, small little choppy steps for life. For self-defense. Now the difference here between the footwork with USPSA, right, and then even the lateral movement, which generally ends up being, you know, here, here, here. You notice how, if you want to take a look at my feet for a second, you notice how as soon as I go to lateral movement, it ends up being like this, right? And there's a lot of short, sliding, choppy steps, right? Right? A lot of lateral shuffling. And that's not actually accurate to what would happen in a real self-defense situation in most cases. There's always that one situation, but in most cases, right? Let's talk a little bit about what you would expect in a CQB setting. I don't personally have experience kicking down doors other than at training events, with training groups, with people who have, whether that's law enforcement or military. But I've trained it enough myself and with other people who have to have a little bit of an understanding on how you would assume this goes, or what I've seen by the leaders in the training community with how body posture looks in CQB, right? So again, we're going to be upright, right? Chin's a little bit more up, eye lines forward so that you can see all this around you, right? So I'm here, and then when I walk, if you want to look at my lower body, it might be like that, might be like that. You might get a little bit of like a shuffle if there's stuff in the room, like couches and tables and coffee tables. It might be like that. Generally, what I don't want to see is I don't want to see tight roping, which is a weak base in any athletic situation, any self-defense situation, and fighting. All these things across the board. Tight roping is bad. In weightlifting, tight roping is bad. Strong base is good. So generally, that's what you're going to see when we're talking about moving through rooms in the CQB situation. Posture up, and then your feet are going to be shoulder width apart, and you're going to be kind of flowing through things. There's not going to be this or this sunken down, squatted, heel toe, choppy step, right? There's not going to be any of that weird footwork or the crossing over of the feet. That kind of stuff doesn't happen in real life. That's a risk. It's a risk to cross your feet over in sports or even in a self-defense situation. Okay, so while we're talking about body mechanics, let's talk about muzzle awareness. Where you are with your muzzle, where your muzzle is pointed. So competitions, they have like the 180 rule where you cannot break the 180 axis or whatever, or else you get disqualified. There's disqualified people on a regular basis from what I've seen, from what I've heard, from what I collected, and it just makes sense. People make mistakes, people are human, that's gonna happen no matter what you do, okay. So what I tend to see more with USPSA competitions, that setting, the muzzle movement, the mechanics generally tend to be downrange and both hands on the gun, and then they tend to move from point A to B to C, generally both hands on the gun, and basically on the same plane instead of having any type of mobility, whether that be physically or mobility and options with the firearm. Okay, so they usually do both hands. This is usually what that looks like. I'm not being funny. This is just what I see. Okay, so I'll see somebody at point A and they'll be right, and that's the muzzle the whole time. To me, that doesn't translate either athletically, going down the hallway, responding at any type of home, any type of building. In an open field, that movement pattern doesn't respond very well, I think, to real life situation. Okay, so what I personally do and also teach is either the temple index or the athletic position, right? So what I mean by that is if you're in a team setting, if you're kicking down doors with people, you're usually going to see people do this, or I don't like that as much because you're flagging people's feet, or you'll see them do temple index, meaning like thumb to the temple, right? So muzzle clears the head, but the only thing that the muzzle is pointing at is the ceiling. Hopefully you're in a single story building. And the reason for that is if you're bumping shoulders, nuts to butts, right? You want to protect your team, and this is the safest direction. Downward, you can get limbs, so you're going to be here. And also, I like to think about these things, but this also kind of translates to wrestling and striking and things like that, having the elbows tucked in like this and having this here. You also have mobility with this other hand if you really wanted to. You can use this for utility. You can use this to kind of post off of things, like post off of somebody. There's things you can do with this other hand, or if you really want to, I've seen people do this, but that's not very good for balance and stability. I don't want somebody to trip over themselves, but having this, I've still been able to go full sprint like this in a team environment. That's usually what I train when I'm in a team environment. If I'm by myself or in open areas training, like knowing I'm going to run a lot or knowing there's not a lot of people around me to train, I generally go with the athletic position, right? So muzzle is slightly above anybody who is around me. It's not pointed straight at you, it's slightly above, right? But I can keep that athletic position. What does it look like when sprinters sprint, right? When sprinters sprint, generally it's like this, right? It's like this, right? It's not like this. It's not this super wide shuffle with this here and this here. When somebody is actually sprinting and they're being athletic in sport, generally it's like this, right? And if you can keep that muzzle above everything, you can stay mobile and run fast. If you can keep that muzzle above everything on the ground, then that's going to be safer than straight down. So that's another thing with muzzle awareness. If you're training USPSA and this is all you know, is as long as it's pointed this way, essentially the muzzle can be at the ground or up towards the sky, it doesn't matter. That's again not realistic. If you're going into a mall, if you're staying in your house where there's family members there, it's not realistic to be pointing down like this. It's either team environment or athletic position, or here, like I said, not so good for the team environment, not so good for mobility. But if you are alone, having that muzzle down here in this position is my third option, least favorite option. But if you're alone, I get it if you're like in a home clearing situation, or if you have people around you but not in front of you. That's something to think about. I usually always train this or athletic, right? So athletic, where I can go sprint open field, or team environment where I can keep a good base. Either way, both times I have one hand available. Again, for posting, right? For posting, for utility, right? Or maybe even I've had people that I train with train, you know, the support. So they have somebody behind them, they can feel, touch feedback. There's somebody here, there's somebody here. My point is that's more realistic for the muzzle position than this, right? So you're here and then you go into here and then you go back into here and then you go into here. And that's just not the same as, you know, being into a full sprint, right? Right? Or being upright, clearing a room. And then also with body position and posture, when you're dealing with hallways and stuff like that, who's to say there's not a possibility clearing a house, walking down a hallway, being in public but having to defend yourself and others? Who's to say you don't turn a corner being upright, and take a look at my feet for a second here. This is naturally where I'd be when I'm turning a corner. And these feet are still in a position where I can brace for impact, right? And bracing for impact is something that is really constantly harped on with combatives or athleticism. When you see somebody do Olympic weightlifting, right, and they do a split jerk, what does that look like, right? That looks like from here to there, right? And what's that position? That's the brace for impact position, right? Somebody's charging you, somebody's coming straight at you. Are you gonna be tight roping like this? Are you gonna be tight roping? Or are you gonna have a strong base, right? Somebody's coming up to me and I have to defend myself. I'm in the boxing stance or I'm in the wrestling stance. Guess what? I'm still bracing for impact. So in every position I've talked about here with body mechanics and posture, I've yet to see one where training the USPSA sit down squat, right? The sit down and squat, the short choppy feet, the tight roping, and then the side lateral shuffling. I've yet to see where that translates to real life. Okay, so last thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to body mechanics and bracing for impact and all those types of methods and skill sets that you want to keep in mind when you're talking defensive versus offensive, competition versus real life, is squaring up. It's the most basic thing you can think about here is squaring up. Often you see this position, right, where I'm sitting down If you want to take a look at my feet are squared up. That's often what you see after somebody stops doing the choppy step with USPSA. They're doing the choppy step, and then they'll end up here in the square position. Why is the square position bad for real life? But have somebody try to just push you over, right, when you're square and kind of sitting. Most of the time what you're going to see people do is when they get pushed, to step back, right? And so whether they're upright or squatted into that like wrestler stance or that boxing stance, either way, what ends up happening is you end up back in your athletic position, back in the one foot in front of the other, squared up, shoulder width apart feet. So there's brace for impact, right? And then there's tight roping, which is USPSA movement. Okay, I want to talk about outrunning your headlights. This seems to be a consistent thing that I see with the competition style shooters. It totally makes sense, but it's also why it's not very good for somebody like me who is training for defensive preparedness or duty purposes, right? In terms of outrunning your headlights, what does that mean? That means that in terms of shooting, are you pushing yourself further than what you can actually achieve, like your skill level, right? So is your skill level here, and are you pushing yourself to here to try and get there versus taking the small incremental steps to get better, right? Competition is great because it drives adaptation. It forces people to level up essentially against the competition, against the people around them, their peers, the people that they strive to be as good as, especially if the people around you that you're training with aren't very good on a regular basis, and you go to these competitions and then all of a sudden you see this super stud, which by the way in most cases you're going to see like the best gear, right, for competition. So a lot of times people don't realize that when they see somebody shooting a 2011 with a massive compensator and a huge red dot window. Either way, that's not the point. The point is that some people might have a stock Glock, they might have a stock SIG, and they might have a stock 1911 and just be like, hey, I went to this competition, and yeah, I'm stock, but I'm trying to freaking go Ricky Bobby. So what I have seen, and I know that some of my friends and people I've shot with, they're like, hey, that's not very accurate, but man, it is. It is. I've seen people around my level of skill drop their firearms at these competitions, whether it's trying to go too fast or having a race holster, that they're not exactly used to or well trained in yet. Those are two different things. Both situations happen, but the point is, I don't see that at courses. I don't see that at your day-to-day training with my friends, by myself, with just my partners, or just, again, I've done a variety of courses from lower level up to super expensive, different backgrounds, and it's not very common to go to a course and not be in a competition setting for the most part, and to see somebody just whole ass go for a draw, right? And then they're ready, and then they're like, shit, because I tried to go too fucking fast. That's more of what I see being bred in the competition setting, because again, I'm gonna go back to the idea that how are you gonna take somebody like me who's hyper competitive, tell them to go into a competition setting, everybody's going fast, everybody's trying to win, but you're here for self-defense, so you don't count, just go slow, just take your time, do what you know works for you. That's boring, and it's a huge hit to your ego. Even if you are super mature, it's a huge hit to your ego to be with your friends and they're all going Ricky Bobby with their compensators and huge red dots and the race holsters, and you're over here concealed with a stock Glock, and you're just like, dang dude, like I really worry about using cover. But these guys are just jumping out of their obstacles to burn stuff down, you know? So anyway, without going too far in that direction, my point is that outrunning your headlights sometimes, and I used to do this a lot when I first started shooting, is I used to be really, really fast out of the holster, punch out and just bah, 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 and then reload, and then bah, 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 and then I'd go check my hits, and guess what? I missed half of them, maybe even more. I have video, I'll drop that in here, of demonstrations of me in the very beginning when everybody's like, fuck, you look like a stud, and I was missing everything. Because I got into this by watching John Wick. I got into this by watching 3-gun competitions. okay? And there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to understand that there's a difference between the two styles of training. There just is. So I may have dry fired my ass off every single day for months and then got super fast, but it wasn't until I actually slowed things down and took the time to make sure I can meet in the middle, where I can do things fast and methodical, slow it down, and then get my hits, right? So people argue, okay, so where else are you going to run into people who know these tips and tricks about, you know, the trigger and how to pull it and grip methods, whether it's spreading the horseshoe or, you know, fucking some of these guys that put their thumb over it and it shifts the weight and the grip displacement on the slide and the frame because the thumb's all the way up here. Where else are you going to learn these things? You know, you might be right. Where else am I going to learn those things? Well, good thing it's 2023 and we have the internet, so I can watch a video of Modern Samurai or take his course and see that this is how he likes to do things, and then never do anything else from that course again other than take that one thing and utilize that one thing. Okay, so that you're going to see a trend here with the things that I'm trying to say in terms of the differences in training, right? You're going to see all these things that may be bad in USPSA, and you're going to see these things that might be good, like how to grip. There's certain things that competitors know that are competitors, and that's how they know how to shoot or get creative with these grips, these ideas with how to pull the trigger and how to grip and where your head should be and how to punch out and how to acquire your dot and all these little tips and tricks. It's okay to get those tips and tricks from the competitive side of things, but you don't have to always do competition on a regular basis to utilize the grip methods, to utilize you know, acquiring the sights in the fastest way possible, trigger pulling, things that you're saying in your head as you're shooting. You don't have to continue to go to competitions and burn these bad habits into your day-to-day, into your training, because nobody can deny that there is bad traits, bad habits that are not good for the self-defense purpose when it comes to competition in USPSA. Nobody can straight up have this conversation with me and be like, there's not one thing about USPSA that isn't, you know, translatable to self-defense training or duty. And that's just not true. Whether it's body mechanics, whether it's how much on attack mode you are versus defense mode, how you assess a situation versus staging an entire stage, whether you're going into a situation second nature, like no one can shoot back, nobody can punch back, no one can tackle back. If you go into that situation thinking that every single time and you train that all the time, that you know you can just jump out of cover and just go bang, 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 and I'm all good, or shoot as fast as possible, because if you get a mic, only thing that happens is point deduction, okay? These are all things that just build up, and you keep piling these negative things over and over again, these negative traits, these negative habits over and over again for what? To learn how to maybe grip something better, to learn how to acquire sights better, to really pick up the pace on your speed and your throttle control. I train by myself or I'll travel to different groups and do training with different people in different states and cities and stuff like that for short periods of time. And I take what I learn from them, and I take the one or two things that I learned that I really like, that resonated with me, and I utilize those moving forward. I use shot timers, I use paper targets, I use steel targets. I shoot 3 yards and I shoot 100 yards. You can figure out how to plan your programming and your training in an efficient, effective way to get to the destination faster. The way I like to think about this is when you see UFC fighters who come from a boxing background, they're Olympic boxer, or they're an Olympic wrestler, or they're Golden Gloves guy. Okay, cool. So you're in this boxing stance, right? Wide feet instead of Muay Thai, which might be, you know, narrow feet, feet close together versus feet wide and, you know, in the brace for impact position. What you see in the UFC is somebody who's really good at boxing get their legs kicked to death if they've never been kicked before training MMA. What you see with all these body positions and So my point here is like, why come from a boxing background to where you master boxing and then you move on to jiu-jitsu and then you move on to Muay Thai and you develop all these guidelines and you get put into this box of guidelines like, hey, we're doing jiu-jitsu, no striking. Hey, you gotta kind of like make sure you don't move in certain ways to hurt somebody because, you know, it's kind of addicting to pull their collar this way, or it's kind of addicting to rest your forearm on their neck as you're maneuvering. Things like that, whatever. I'm just, you know, saying as an example. Why would you train USPSA super hard when you know mixed martial arts is the outcome? You know that you want to be fluid in everything rather than really good at just competition or really good at just competition jiu-jitsu. Do you kind of get what I'm saying? There is steps that you can be taking and steps that you can be skipping. Not saying you should skip steps in the macro. I'm just saying that there's steps that are unnecessary. If you know you're never going to compete in a jiu-jitsu competition, then, and all you care about is self-defense, then go into training knowing that you're gonna train jiu-jitsu in ways that there is striking involved, there is knives involved, there is firearms involved. You make sure you go into it knowing these things so you don't put yourself in this box to where you're only training this, and the only reason why you had to learn skill A, you know, or habit A is because you're in a competition setting, when in real life, in a real life situation with self-defense or outside of competition, there's more than just boxing and MMA. There's leg kicks, there's wrestling, there's jiu-jitsu. So don't just learn boxing and then think it's going to translate over to MMA. That means you're going to be a tighter boxer, you're going to have better timing, you're going to have better accuracy, all these things. But ultimately that stance might change after getting kicked in the fucking legs, right? So why develop all these unnecessary habits through USPSA? I personally will go to the range with my groups of friends, or like I said, other courses, and I'll utilize this from this course, this from USPSA, this grip method from the best competitors in the world, this stance from, you know, SEAL Team 6, you know, this optic sight acquisition trait from you know, one of the best competitors in the world, or like this mindset, this defensive approach to a situation from, you know, somebody who is SWAT or something like that. Do you kind of get what I'm saying here? The trade-off is bad. It just doesn't make sense to me why you wouldn't understand that there is things you're going through on a regular basis by training USPSA that are just, they're just plain and simple unnecessary. You don't have to deal with the 180 rule. You don't have to deal with these weird body positions and body mechanics. You don't have to deal with unloading your gun every single time you're done with the match. You don't have to deal with being in a holster and having to load, make ready, and then reholster. These are all traits and habits that you're developing. You're piling on these traits and habits, right? And again, outrunning your headlights is something I see at competitions. That's not something I ever see at a course or a regular defensive mindset range day with my friends. We compete. I have friends that are as good as shooters as me, and you know, we joke around and like you know, we run Safariland holsters, and sometimes me and some of my friends will get stuck in the level 3 holster. It won't come out because we're trying to outrun our headlights. We are trying to get to that next level, but ultimately we have a level 3 holster because we're thinking defensively. We don't have this loose hot dog in a hallway holster because we know that that's not very effective in a real self-defense or tactical situation or duty situation. Like, it just doesn't make sense to have these holsters that are halfway exposed with a little lever in the back, and you have to make sure that you fold that lever over before you're ready to shoot, and all these different race things that you do, like magnet holsters. None of that stuff translates over. So especially if you're somebody who isn't running a Safariland level 3, Alienware level 3, or Alien Gear, whatever. If you're not somebody who's running concealed, that has like a true solid click, that has really good retention, I don't want you to tell me anything about how you train for self-defense for preparedness reasons. I don't want to hear it, because you're letting the game get to you. You're letting the game and the competition get to you if you don't run your Safari Land or your concealed setup. If you run your compensated 2011 versus your duty Glock, duty SIG, right? These are all things that are in the mindset that, again, they're layering habits. They're layering habits. So call it what it is. USPSA is fun. USPSA is a hobby. There's much better ways to train. Your average person like me who has, I run a small business, I do contract media work, and I also am falling behind on my functional fitness, right? And honestly, I should be thinking about my fitness more than how much I shoot. How often do you think your average person is going to be able to shoot / afford to shoot / are you figuring out or thinking about the amount of time you have weekly or monthly as a parent to train? All these people pushing the whole USPSAs for everybody. I'll tell you what, great community, great time, and it's a great place to meet other people in the 2A community. But it's not even close to one of the top 3 things I would prioritize in terms of training for self-defense reasons. I think that the great equalizer, especially if you have a wife or something like that, or a mother that you want to be safe, the great equalizer is a firearm. That should be towards the top of the priorities. But health and fitness, mental clarity, that should all be there too. And I'll tell you what, the only people I remotely trust in a real situation, and that's really loose, are people that shoot all the time. And that's why USPSA works for them. They shoot weekly, if not more. They dry fire almost daily. And if that's the case, how realistic is that to anybody that's just your average person who values 2A in the mindset, who values self-defense? I don't have any family members personally that dry fire on a regular basis or get to go to the range more than every few months. Now let's say you're adamant about your training, you want to stay on top of it. Okay, what's that? Shooting once a month? Dry firing, 5 to 10 minutes a few days a week? Is USPSA the best place for me to be utilizing my time, or is traveling to get different courses from different people who've experienced things to get different approaches and real in-person coaching in real time? Maybe that is where I should be spending my time. Again, not to mention the fact that the internet is a library, a vast library with a whole lot of information that I don't need to be doing competitions and matches to be burning these bad habits into my head. All right, so the last things that I want to say to kind of sum everything up is, how much money do you spend shooting weekly or every couple weeks using Syntech competition ammo with compensators, with ammo that's used for compensators versus whatever you actually carry? How much money is spent doing that? How much money is spent renting your own bay at a local range or going to BLM land once every 2 months to kind of test your own things that you've learned from either the internet or courses that you took with real life coaches with real life experience? And how much are you spending on gear versus training? How much time do you have to train? It's not about the gear in most cases. It's honestly about the time and the money that you have. So if I have the time and money that I have, I personally feel that stacking myself up against my fellow USPSA competitors that I'm friends with. I sponsor Jake Turner. I built him a Gunco Glock, training purpose Glock, out of my own pocket, nobody else's. If I hated USPSA, I wouldn't do that. Okay, I think it has its place. He inspired me with how passionate he is with his dry fire and everything at such a young age. My point in bringing that up is I'm not anti-USPSA. I just think for me personally, it makes sense every 2 to 3 months to stack myself up against, let's say, Jake and his family and friends and everything like that. And for the other, whatever, 89 days out of my 3-month block, I'm going out getting my own range time at BLM land or taking a course, trying to learn something new from somebody with hands-on coaching, and trying the little things I take here and here and here, and piecing what is necessary and efficient into my training. So let me know what you guys think. I'm up for debate. I'm not the end-all be-all. I just like to ask questions and I like to do things efficiently.